Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that takes that huge, sometimes overwhelming fire hose of information from complex sources.
And we try to boil it down, find the patterns, the essential takeaways you need to grasp.
Today, we're really opening up the playbook on economic power. I mean, the ultimate playbook.
Yeah, our sources today, they cover centuries. We're looking at the people who built things, broke things, sometimes ruthlessly reshaped the whole economic landscape.
It's not just a business history lesson, though.
No, not at all. It's more like an investigation into the mechanics of it all. How control works, how assets get piled up, the strategic thinking, sometimes the ruthlessness behind it.
Right. And that's our mission today. Pull out that common playbook. We're tracing the tactics, looking for the common threads from those 19th century tycoons.
All the way to modern finance guys, tech founders, the big players today.
And I think we have to start with something huge, a really pivotal moment where the rules of the game fundamentally changed. It's basically the death of the gentleman banker's fund.
Exactly. That's the perfect starting point. Because for decades, especially, in the mid-20th century, after the Depression crises, high finance had this sort of unwritten understanding.
Like a club.
Very much like a club. Institutions like J.P. Morgan and Co., they represented what was called relationship banking. It was about loyalty, long-term views, stability. A certain amount of trust among the elite players, maybe a bit insular, sure, but the priority was keeping things stable.
But that foundation, it cracked. Something broke it down systematically, and it seems like it started with chipping away at the rules that kept things separate, stability from risk.
Yeah, we're talking about the erosion around rules like Glass-Steagall. That was the law that, for decades, separated plain old commercial banking, deposits and loans, from the riskier investment banking side, like underwriting stocks or trading.
Kept the risky stuff away from regular deposits.
Right. But once that wall started crumbling, especially through deregulation, shifts in interpretation. This happened a lot in the 80s and 90s, and the whole culture on Wall Street just flipped. Well, suddenly the goal wasn't stability anymore. It was about maximizing transactions. How fast can we do deals? How much can we make on this trade? The velocity became key.
Then this wasn't a gentle shift, was it? It sounds like it got pretty aggressive.
Oh, it was nakedly aggressive. Investment banks saw the opportunity. They realized they could get ahead by ditching those old club rules. One source we looked at mentioned how, regarding Morgan Stanley, a traditional powerhouse, former partners, other banks, they started raiding other Morgan Stanley clients with abandon, just poaching them. Loyalty went out the window.
Raiding clients with abandon, that definitely paints a picture of financial warfare, almost. Did this just create chaos, or was there a new kind of ruthless efficiency to it?
It certainly set a new standard for competition, cutthroat competition. But the key thing for our discussion today, the big consequence, is how this aggression fueled economic inequality. Economists have dug into this period.
Then they found a direct link.
A significant link. Deregulation in finance is seen as a major driver of the wealth gap we see today.
Wow. Can we actually quantify that? How much did loosening the rules really boost the finance sector itself?
The numbers are pretty startling. Estimates suggest nearly a quarter, 25% of the increase in incomes within finance came directly from deregulation.
So a fourth of their income gains weren't from some brilliant new product, but just from changing the rules of the game.
Basically, yeah. Changing the rules around risk and competition.
And that must have had ripple effects. Like, who decided to work there?
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't just about income. It changed the whole status of Wall Street. The profitability just exploded. And that created this massive brain drain.
Brain drain? From where?
From everywhere else. Deregulation is also tied to a calculated 40% increase in the educational level of people working in finance. Think about that. The smartest, most ambitious graduates. Maybe they would have gone into science or academia or public service before.
But the money was just too good on Wall Street.
Exactly. Astronomical paychecks pulled top talent straight into finance.
So it becomes this feedback loop, right? More profit attracts better talent. They figure out ways to take more risks, generate even more profit. Which just reinforces the power and prestige of Wall Street over everything else.
Precisely. It sets the stage perfectly for what we need to talk about next, the actual tactics, the specific, relentless methods used to maximize assets once those financial floodgates were open.
Okay, so if the old code collapsed, creating this new playing field, what was the guiding philosophy now?
For corporate America, especially in the late 20th century, the mantra became shareholder primacy. Everything for the shareholder.
And Jack Welch at GE, he's like the poster child for this, isn't he? He wasn't just running GE. He made maximizing shareholder value into like the company's only religion.
Totally. Welch's whole strategy was built on it. Three main things: constant downsizing, cutting jobs relentlessly, nonstop deal-making, buying and selling businesses, and massively financializing GE, turning it almost into a bank as much as an industrial company.
All focused on one thing.
Enriching investors. That was the singular goal. He apparently operated with this belief, almost a divine right, to make GE the most profitable, most shareholder-focused company on earth.
Let's unpack that a bit, because it's a huge shift, right? Who actually gets the rewards when a company succeeds? How much wealth now goes to shareholders and executives versus, say, reinvestment or workers?
The shift has been dramatic, almost total. Historically, companies tried to balance things. Profits went to workers, communities, reinvestment, and investors. Now, our sources show the lion's share, the overwhelming majority, flows straight to investors and top executives. Over the past decade, something like 93% of corporate profits went back to investors, mostly through stock buybacks and dividends.
93%. Wow. So only 7% is left for R&D. New factories, raises for the average worker. That's not just tweaking the balance, that's extraction.
It's systemic extraction.
Yeah.
And to make that work, you need a certain kind of management style, intense, almost brutal. Welch called it asking for more from fewer.
Right. Fewer workers, more output, more profit.
And you see this contrast so clearly in his actions. He demanded absolute top-tier amenities for his executives, while at the same time rolling out these huge layoff plans year after year, cutting tens of thousands of jobs, often long-term employees.
That helipad story really sums it up, doesn't it? Focusing on executive convenience while the workforce is shrinking.
It does. When GE was setting up its big management training center, Welch basically told the town, Crotonville, either you let me build a helipad for my executives to fly in and out easily, or I'll take the whole center somewhere else.
And the town caved.
They caved. His logic was, if GE is going to be the best, our top managers, the cream of the crop, they need and deserve the best facilities. Never mind the human cost of the downsizing happening at the same time.
This laser focus on maximizing returns, controlling everything, sometimes trampling everyone else. That wasn't invented by Welch, was it? You can see echoes of this way back, like in the Gilded Age.
Oh, absolutely. If Welch was the high priest of shareholder primacy, guys like Andrew Carnegie were maybe the early philosophers of brutal efficiency. Right. Carnegie, the steel guy, he didn't just accept wealth concentration, he argued for it.
Argued for it? How?
He wrote that great inequality of environment and the fact that business was concentrated in the hands of a few, he saw that as essential to the future progress of the race.
Inequality is necessary for progress. That's quite a justification.
It's the ultimate economic rationalization, right? And to make sure business stayed concentrated, these tycoons got really good at monopolistic control.
How did they do that back then?
Well, take steel. Making steel efficiently back then depended heavily on the Bessemer process. So what did the 10 biggest steel makers do? They didn't just compete fiercely. They formed this cozy little group called the Bessemer Association.
Oh, okay. What was their main tactic? Price fixing?
Not primarily. It was smarter, more structural. It was patent control.
They locked up the key technology.
Exactly. By holding all the critical patents needed for Bessemer steel, they could effectively stop anyone else from building a new steel mill. It created this massive barrier to entry.
So they didn't even need to compete on price or quality.
Not really. They controlled the supply. That guaranteed healthy profits for the members, without all the messy uncertainty of actual free market competition. It was legal, structural, and incredibly effective at concentrating power.
That's control through legal means. But others, like Cornelius Vanderbilt, they seem to prefer a more direct physical approach to crushing rivals.
Vanderbilt was the absolute master of the rate war, pure aggression. When he wanted to take over the route between New York and Philadelphia, competing against the established Union line, his approach was just overwhelming force.
How do you do it?
Massive oversupply of ships and trains and just suicidal pricing.
How low did the fares go in that specific fight?
To just crush the competition, Vanderbilt dropped the fare to Philly down to $1.
$1. Seriously.
$1. Yeah. That included free meals on board. At the same time, he built up this huge fleet, strategically placing his ships and trains to fight the Union line on every front. It was brute force, cutthroat pricing, smart deployment, and just having deeper pockets to outlast the other guy. Yeah. Market control through sheer force.
So whether it's locking up patents like the steel guys or predatory pricing like Vanderbilt, The goal is the same. Dominate the market, control the assets.
Absolutely. And this drive for control, it doesn't disappear. When we shift from those early industrialists to, say, modern tech leaders, you see it again, maybe in subtler ways, but just as intense. It's often called the founder's distortion field.
Right. Less about crushing rivals physically, more about controlling the environment, the time, the attention, the whole ecosystem around the company.
And you see that demand for total commitment with someone like Jeff Bezos and Amazon. It wasn't just about doing your job well, it was about total personal dedication.
How did that manifest?
Well, there's that famous story about bus passes for employees. The idea came up, should Amazon subsidize bus passes? Bezos apparently said no.
Why not? Seems like a standard employee perk.
His reason was telling. He reportedly said he didn't want employees to leave work to catch the bus.
He literally wanted to make it harder for them to leave.
That seems to be the implication. By not subsidizing the bus, it encouraged people to drive and keep their cars there, which meant, as the source puts it, there was never any pressure to go home. It's subtle, right? But it's a control mechanism. It aims to dissolve work-life balance and demand focus on the company above everything else. The workplace becomes this high-performance bubble you don't leave.
Okay, then you have someone like Steve Jobs. His control seemed less about physical presence, more about the technology itself, the integrity of the ecosystem, his whole integrated approach.
Right. Jobs' reality distortion field was legendary for pushing people. But technologically, his control came from insisting that the hardware and software had to be inseparable. Like the iPod and iTunes, he was absolutely rigid about this.
And he rejected the way most other companies did it, the decoupled approach, like Microsoft licensing Windows everywhere.
Fiercely rejected it. Jobs fundamentally believed the user experience was everything. And for him, that perfect experience relied entirely on the iPod working in complete sync with iTunes. Total harmony.
He thought letting others in would mess it up.
Exactly. He felt the quality, the elegance would be ruined if other hardware makers or software developers got involved. He needed to control every single bit of it, from the silicon to the flesh, as one source put it. It ensured a seamless experience for the user.
But it also locks everyone into Apple's world, right? Makes it way harder for competitors.
Absolutely. It builds a powerful walled garden.
Yeah.
So this deep desire for control, whether it's employee time or tech infrastructure, it leads us right into the next big theme, the shadow economy, where power operates behind the scenes, using opacity, complexity, even deception.
Okay, the shadow economy. Where does that show up first?
Well, in global markets, especially looking at parts of Asia, there's this model built around institutional opacity, sometimes called the Asian Godfather model. And it seems specifically designed to allow for the expropriation of minority shareholders.
Expropriation? Like stealing from the small investors. How does that work? Is it just bad governance or something more deliberate?
It seems quite deliberate. It relies on creating these vast, intentionally complex corporate structures, a conglomerate web, as one source calls it.
And the complexity itself is the tool. How does that help siphon off wealth?
It does two key things. It hides where the real value is, and it makes accountability almost impossible. Take someone like the Malaysian billionaire Kwek Lang Chan. The sources say he controlled maybe 19 companies that were publicly listed ones you could track on the stock market.
Okay, the visible part.
Right. But behind those, he also controlled scores, maybe hundreds, of private companies. Totally opaque.
So the public companies have minority shareholders, but the private ones don't, and transactions happen between them.
Exactly. The private companies can do deals with the public ones that aren't at arm's length. They might buy assets from the listed company cheaply, or sell services to the listed company at inflated prices, or get preferential loans. Value gets moved around in the shadows.
So the public shareholders take the risk in the listed company, but the profits get funneled into the private entities controlled by the tycoon.
That's the core mechanism described. It defines a lot of tycoon activity in the region, and tracing that money flow through hundreds of legal entities. It's nearly impossible for regulators or minority investors. Accountability just dissolves in the complexity.
And this kind of opacity, it wasn't just limited to tycoons in specific regions, right? Even sophisticated global markets had issues with manipulation hidden by complexity, like the LIBOR scandal.
Oh, LIBOR was colossal. Absolutely. The London Interbank offered rate. This number set the benchmark for interest rates on trillions of dollars of financial products worldwide. Mortgages, derivatives, corporate loans, everything.
And it was being manipulated. How is that even possible on such a huge scale? How did they hide it?
It was hidden in plain sight, almost. The system itself lacked transparency and rigor. That's what made it vulnerable.
What were the specific weaknesses?
There were really three main things. First, the definition of LIBOR was kind of fuzzy. It was supposed to be an estimate of what banks thought they'd be charged to borrow from each other, not an actual transaction rate.
Just an estimate. Okay.
Second, there were basically no hard rules or verifiable data required for how the banks came up with that estimate. It was largely based on trust. And third, the sheer volume of transactions happening every day made it hard to spot small, coordinated tweaks.
So traders could exploit that fuzziness.
Absolutely. They can take advantage of circumstances absent ironclad evidence of wrongdoing. They were basically exploiting this massive global honor system, and they quickly realized it wasn't being policed.
So what did they actually do?
Traders would message the people at their bank responsible for submitting the LIBOR estimate and ask them to nudge it slightly higher or lower, depending on which way would benefit their own trading books. A tiny nudge could impact billions in contracts globally.
And they knew they were pushing boundaries.
It seems so. One source mentions a trader worrying in internal chats that someone might read them later, suggesting they knew they were in a gray area, at least ethically, but felt protected because direct oversight was basically non-existent. It was a free-for-all within the rules, or lack thereof.
Okay, so when oversight fails, whether it's because of deliberate complexity like the conglomerate webs or just systemic weakness like LIBOR, deception can really flourish. We saw that more recently with Theranos, right?
Theranos is a classic textbook case. Deception built on claims that just weren't possible. Their whole pitch was precision. Our magic box can run hundreds of tests on a tiny drop of blood super accurately.
And they had specific metrics for that accuracy claim.
They did. They specifically boasted about coefficients of variation, CVs, being less than 10%.
Okay, for people who aren't lab scientists, what's a CV and why was under 10% so important?
Right. A CV basically measures how much variation you get in test results. If you test the same sample multiple times, do you get the same number? A low CV, like under 10%, means the test is very precise, very repeatable. That's critical for medical diagnoses. You need consistent results.
And Theranos wasn't hitting that number.
Not even close, according to the sources. Yeah. Their own validation reports, including ones they shared with potential partners like the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer, showed CVs that were way, way higher than 10%, glaringly inconsistent with their public claims.
So what happened when Pfizer saw that data? Did they buy the story?
Nope. Pfizer walked away. They ended their collaboration precisely because of these glaring inconsistencies. The gap between the marketing hype and the actual data was just too big. Theranos even tried to spin it later, claiming the under 10% CV only applied to one specific test, their vitamin D test, trying to downplay the failure of the core technology.
So that's calculated deception. But failure can also come from just neglect, right? Like sheer mismanagement. The Howard Hughes TWA example seems to fit there.
Oh, absolutely. Howard Hughes's control over TWA was total on paper, but in reality, by the mid-1950s, he just wasn't there. His disregard for the airline was infamous.
What happened?
Well, the airline's president died, and he just never appointed a replacement, left this huge leadership vacuum. Meanwhile, Hughes himself was practically unreachable, hiding out in hotels, avoiding decisions.
So who was actually running the airline day to day?
Nobody, effectively. It descended into chaos. The source mentions hostile cliques forming internally, fighting for power, but with no central direction. And the financial results were predictable.
Started losing money.
Hemorrhaging money. Lost $2.3 million in 1956 alone, which was a lot back then. And this wasn't because of bad market conditions. It was pure neglect. And that got the creditors, the banks like Equitable, who had loaned TWA huge amounts, extremely worried their investment was dissolving because the owner just didn't care.
Okay, so whether it's deliberate opacity, systemic failure, outright deception, or just neglect, the common thread seems to be a failure of accountability. And that leads us to the final layer of control, using all that financial power to influence politics and the state itself. We have to look at this impartially, right? How wealth and politics mix.
Yeah, and the clearest way that happens, especially in the U.S., is through dark money. That's the term for money flowing into politics outside the traditional campaign finance system. Both sides use it.
Both Democratic and Republican-aligned groups.
Absolutely. They use these outside spending vehicles in the U.S. They're often called 527 groups to push political agendas.
So what are these 527 groups and why dark money?
They're tax-exempt organizations. They can raise unlimited amounts of cash from individuals, corporations, unions, and spend it on political activities, as long as they don't explicitly say vote for or vote against a specific candidate. The dark part comes because, for a long time, it was hard to see exactly who was donating the money.
So it allows wealthy donors or big companies to influence policy debates, maybe on regulations or judges or taxes, without leaving clear fingerprints.
That's the core function, massive influence, often without immediate public visibility.
And the scale of this,
Yeah.
the money involved is huge.
It's astonishing. The sources mention figures like George Soros, the liberal hedge fund billionaire. Back in 2004, he apparently pledged to spend his whole fortune, if needed, to defeat George W. Bush. That year alone, he funneled over $27 million into these outside groups.
And on the other side.
You have conservative examples like the Koch brothers, the industrialists. They pour enormous sums into funding organizations like Americans for Prosperity. This group works at the grassroots level and through media to promote free market policies.
So it really shows that using financial muscle to shape politics isn't a partisan issue. It's a structural feature of how extreme wealth operates today. And sometimes that line between business interests and state power, it just completely disappears, doesn't it? Like in Russia.
It can become razor thin or non-existent. Look at the experience of foreign investors trying to fight corruption in Russia, like Bill Browder. His work became incredibly dangerous when it started hitting the economic interests tied directly to Vladimir Putin.
He thought being a foreigner gave him some protection.
Initially, yeah. Browder mentions thinking he was somehow exempt from the informal rules that governed how Russian elites operated among themselves.
But he wasn't exempt when he crossed a certain line.
Not at all. When his anti-corruption efforts stopped targeting just rival oligarchs or lower-level officials and started zeroing in on Putin's inner circle and their core financial interests, the state machinery came down on him. Hard.
What happened?
His company was effectively seized, his lawyers faced persecution, one tragically died in prison, and Browder himself was forced out of the country. It's a stark lesson. In some systems, challenging the concentrated economic power of the elite is the same thing as challenging the state itself. The two are just completely fused.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. From the old banking code collapsing to Welch's 93% profit extraction, Gilded Age tactics, tech founder control, global opacity, political money. Let's try to wrap this up. What does all this structural accumulation actually mean for, the average person listening?
Well, if we zoom out to the really big picture, the data strongly suggests the huge wealth gap we see today isn't just a temporary blip. It might actually be a return to a more historically normal state of affairs.
This connects to that big study, Capital in the 21st Century, by Thomas Piketty, right? What did he find about capital versus income over the long run?
Exactly. Piketty's core argument, based on centuries of data, is that the 20th century, with its world wars, high taxes, strong unions, relatively lower inequality, was actually the historical exception. The shocks between 1914 and 1945 temporarily knocked down the power of inherited wealth and capital.
And now we're reverting back.
His argument is that the underlying structure is reasserting itself. The world is returning to high capital-to-income ratios, like in the 19th century. In this state, wealth that's already accumulated, capital, tends to grow faster than the overall economy or wages from labor.
And what does that mean for society structure today?
It leads to a very specific kind of stratification. In developed countries, you see this. Emerging middle group, maybe a quarter to a third of the population. They've managed to accumulate some capital, maybe a house, some retirement savings, and collectively they own maybe a quarter to a third of the total national wealth.
Okay, so there is a middle class with some assets.
Yes, but here's the contrast. The poorest half of the population, their share of the total wealth is described as minuscule, generally around 5%, maybe less.
So a middle group exists, but they're dwarfed by the top, and half the people have almost nothing. It really underscores that point about capital growing faster than labor. And we can actually see that in the returns achieved by big pools of capital.
Yeah, we can quantify that power of capital. Look at, for example, the investment returns of large U.S. university endowments. These operate like huge, sophisticated investment funds.
What kind of returns did they get?
Between 1980 and 2010, a 30-year period, they averaged an annual return of 8.2%. The source calls this extremely high.
8.2% every year, compounded, for 3 decades. When the overall economy might grow at, 3 or 4%? And wages maybe even less.
Exactly. That difference, that gap between the return on capital R and the rate of economic growth, G as Piketty puts it. When R is consistently greater than G, wealth concentration mathematically accelerates. It pulls away.
It's like an engine driving inequality.
It is. It ensures that wealth becomes more and more concentrated unless something significant pushes back, like major policy changes, progressive taxation, or some kind of massive economic disruption. Otherwise, labor income, growing slower, just can't keep pace. It's almost a mathematical certainty.
So we've seen the system is structurally tilted towards concentration, and the tactics used, ruthlessness, opacity, political leverage, they amplify that.
And it's not stopping. Our sources even suggest technology itself might accelerate it further. Things like AI having a natural affinity for monopolies because they rely so heavily on vast amounts of data and network effects. The playbook evolves. It doesn't go away.
And governments, they often know exactly who owns what, right? The French government example, fracking apartments, stock portfolios, the information is there.
The data in many places is already compiled. It's not really a question of knowing anymore. It's a question of what, if anything, gets done with that knowledge.
Which brings us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you, the listener. Think about this. We've seen this consistent pattern this deep dive has shown: wealth concentrating, amplified by technology, by deregulation. And we know governments often have incredibly detailed data on assets and debts. So, what comes next? What kind of new mechanisms, maybe around transparency, maybe collective action? What needs to be developed so the benefits of all this concentrated capital growth might actually contribute to broader economic stability, instead of us just relying on the genius or sometimes the ruthlessness of individuals at the very top?
It's a huge question. Because the forces driving inequality are clearly structural. They're powerful. They're very effective. Understanding how they work, the mechanics we've talked about today, that's got to be the first step towards figuring out any kind of response.
A crucial exploration into how power really works in our world. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive.